Oh, no. I thought that was somebody joining us. It's just notifying that we're now live on YouTube.
Yep.
I think.
Yeah, there's still nobody here. We'll kill it. Oh.
Yep.
Is there a delay?
A little bit of a delay. There we go. All right, so I'll take this. Post it. All right.
Yep.
Well, all right. We will get started. So right now we put together a little webinar for the day. Happy Friday, everybody. Anybody's out there watching us on YouTube, Facebook. We are live and ready to start talking about the big question that's on everybody's mind right now. And it's, is it the right time to buy, to sell, to refinance, hold tight? What do we do in this crazy pandemic world that we live in currently? And, there is no certain answer for anybody. I think it's a very personal decision. And it's really like, this is one of the constants in real estate. It always comes back to your goals, right? What are you trying to accomplish? What's really driving the decision behind maybe wanting to purchase or sell or refinance or anything like that? And so the purpose of today's webinar is really just to chat about the various factors that go into that decision-making process and how you might be able to flesh out the right answer for you. I want to talk a little bit about some of the best practices, some of the big changes that we've implemented recently to help continue to practice our craft, but also to do so in a way that keeps the best interest of the public at the forefront. So we'll go through some of those steps and procedures as well, and then do a little bit of research on the market. There's some macro and micro analysis that I wanted to share with you guys that I think can help point us in the right direction of whether, it's kind of the crystal ball is what I call it. It's the crystal ball that lets us look into the future to see if, what we think may come of all of this. So, and just kind of a talking point, a point of order here. If you've got any questions, please feel free to jump in. When you come in, your microphone and camera will be off, but you're welcome to turn those on. I've also got Marco Rossi here, and he's helping me out. If there's any questions that pop up in the chat box, if you'd rather just type a question in there, he'll jump in and interrupt me while I'm talking and ask your question, and I'll be glad to answer it right away. So I'm very happy to answer any questions you've got, and of course, we'll save some time at the end. I'm looking to get through this in about 15, 20 minutes, leave some time for questions at the end. Can't see us going more than 30, 35 minutes at the top, but I'll hang around and chat with anybody if they want to do so. So without further ado, I will share my screen. Lovely picture of my fam. Here we are. So one of the things that we really, like I said, want to focus on is there is an absolute need for change during this time. And so, what does that change look like? Here's kind of a nice summary of what we've come up with. And we've got this on our social media channels. And if you go to our homepage, you can see what this looks like as well. From a showing perspective, we're showing in separate cars. Our agents and our buyers are riding around in separate cars, and that's a really nice social distancing measure right there, right? But I think even before we start getting in cars and going out to see properties, we're trying to maximize the amount of research that we're doing online. So whether that's through photos or through video tours or through 3D Matterport type tours, let's see if we can't answer as many questions virtually as possible. And therefore, we might historically go see 6, 7 houses before making a decision to write a contract. We're going to try to get that down to 2 or 3. Obviously, if we can't accomplish that through 2 or 3 in-person visits, we'll do what it takes. But we're hopeful that we can do our best to try to keep everyone safe. Wiping down door handles and switches, as we're walking through, using sanitary wipes, hand sanitizer, and door wipes themselves, so that any areas that we do need to touch, we're cleaning up behind ourselves. And also, we have a policy that agents touch, buyers look, right? So the buyer's representative will be opening the doors and flipping on light switches. And then the buyers themselves try not to touch anything at all as they're going through the property. And also on the seller side, when our homes are occupied, we're asking our sellers to do as much of the preparation work on the front end as possible. So if they can't get all the lights on, if they can, maybe any doors that may need to be open, go ahead and get those opened up. Ideally, we'd like to, have our agent open the front door and maybe the back door, and then close those back up, and everything else should already be set and ready to go for us. Virtual showings and open houses. Again, from a preview perspective, we can virtually do a lot online these days. And the same thing is true with open houses. In fact, Marco is hosting our first virtual open house this weekend. It's at a great listing. If you go to our website, check out the featured listing for Dillard Crossing. That'll be held on Sunday at 2 p.m. And, Marco will be walking through the photos, walking through all of the assets that we have, all of the disclosure information, doing a little market analysis, just kind of peeking around at kind of what's going on in the area. Agents understand not only the specific listing very detailed and very deeply, but they understand the markets and the neighborhoods and the surrounding area. So you'll be able to gain a lot of information there, and of course, be able to ask questions right there face-to-face in a Zoom meeting. So I think it's going to be really valuable and really helpful, for that listing and that property, but for any properties that somebody wants to virtually view online, whether there's like a big video or 3D tour or not. I think there's a lot that can be gained from seeing things online with an agent. All of our money being transferred is going to be done electronically, right? So we're not accepting paper checks for earnest money anymore. We're going to get all that done either through a wire or an ACH transfer. And the same thing for closing funds. So when the buyer needs to bring money to the table for their down payment and for the closing costs they're responsible for, all that's going to be wired in. And that's not a new thing. I mean, most closings have required inbound wires for the buyer's proceeds anyways, but it's definitely a firm policy now. We're providing hand sanitizer, mask, gloves, booties at the listings. This is kind of a conversation we're having with our sellers. To what extent do they want their property to be protected? And we're helping them prepare for that and providing them resources for that as well. So that if they require, the wearing of gloves and the booties and sanitizer to be used going in and coming out, these kind of things, that we're requesting that the agents showing the property are respecting those wishes and following those procedures and protocols. Minimizing contact and exposure at closings. There's a slide I'm going to go into a little bit deeper on some of the legal changes that have taken place in the state, but we can actually zero out person-to-person contact at closings these days. So that's kind of a big deal. And then from a company standpoint, we're all working from home, just like everybody else. We're doing all of our Zoom meetings. Fortunately, Community and Council has been utilizing Zoom ever since day one, since we started the business a little over a year ago. So we're pretty comfortable with the Zoom meetings, but we're also, trying to stay in touch on phone calls and one-on-one Zoom meetings, and trying to do some fun stuff too, just to kind of keep camaraderie up and keep connected and all these sorts of things. So virtual consultations, again, these are hugely important, right? Sitting down in a one-on-one setting, you can go through our buyer presentation, our listing presentation. We can do this very effectively. We have a great presentation deck similar to the one that I'm using right now, where we can convey all of the important information and make sure that people are, they have the information they need to help make these big decisions. Emailing of listings. I mean, this is nothing new, right? You guys have all, I'm sure, been receiving listings via email, through different agents, different portals, whatever it may be. But we're really leaning on that technology even more so these days. I touched on the virtual home tours. There's a cool example on our website. A couple of our listings in our featured listing page, so you navigate to the top there, have 3D Matterport tours. So if you go into that and check it out, you'll see that these are actually very, very immersive experiences. You can really gain a lot of insight about the property just by doing one of these 3D tours. So they're really cool. And you're starting to see those become more and more prevalent. Again, I touched on virtual open houses just a minute ago about the one Marco has at Dillard Crossing this weekend. Electronically sign, again, this is not super new. We've been doing e-signatures for our contract documents for some time, but this is just for anyone who hasn't bought or sold recently, know that we're not putting pen to paper anymore, and we haven't for years really. So there will be no contact requirements for our contracts. The inspection process is basically unchanged, although there is one significant change. Most of the inspectors that we are working with, Home Probe in particular is our favorite home inspection company. They're taking great steps to limit the number of people that are showing up at home inspections. So basically, if your name is on the contract, you're allowed to come to the home inspection, but they're very much urging everyone else to not come. And then also, they would only like those folks to try to just come for maybe the last 30, 45 minutes. Traditionally, we've always said to our buyers, hey, if you can go to the whole inspection, that's fantastic. And, home inspectors like Home Probe love having the buyer present because they can help walk them through, what they're seeing in real time. But again, in this case, it's a 3 to 4 hour commitment, and we really prefer to minimize that exposure for the inspector and the home buyer. So getting that maybe down to the last 30 minutes, and again, just being the people who are on the contract, have them present. Or maybe a partner or spouse, right? Regardless of whether they're on contract or not. Earnest money delivery, we touched on that. We're going to handle that all electronically now. And then, with closings being remote, right? So the governor passed a law where we can do electronic notary. And so that allows for video closings for the real estate transactions. So even if buyer and sellers aren't physically present, we can have keys delivered for the house. So we really have a lot of tools at our disposal through some legal changes and through some technology that we've implemented to very much minimize the person-to-person exposure for the real estate process. So that's pretty exciting. Loan application appointments via video conference. This is kind of my topic of notable changes. Really what I want to talk about here is how the loan products are changing rapidly right now. And this isn't a point of concern necessarily, but it's just a point of preparedness. So when you're meeting with your loan officers to talk about the financing options that are available, if it's been 30 days or so since you've had that conversation, or certainly if you haven't had it yet, and you're thinking about buying, have that conversation, have it frequently, do a deep dive early. We always advise people to go very, very deep in the beginning. That way they know exactly and very confidently, what they're going to have at their disposal in terms of loan products and likelihood of, getting those loan products and likelihood of being approved, this kind of thing. But in a changing and dynamic market that we're in right now, just shoot straight to the point. Criteria is changing. Credit score requirements are being increased. Debt to income ratios are going down. There's a lot of requirements that are changing, and it doesn't mean that you'll be unable to get financing. No, I mean, that's far from the truth. It just means that the loan type may change or the structure of it may change, and you'd rather be proactive in getting that information, getting that news so that you can make a pivot adjustment quickly. So just be very much in contact with your loan officer on a regular basis. Again, we touched on the video notary and e-notary. It's a big deal. And so being able to facilitate closings electronically is a kind of a cool thing. So those are kind of the big changes that we've made to ensure public safety and also be able to facilitate an effective and successful real estate transaction and closing. Right now, more than anything, people are saying to us, and if you're watching this either live right now or the recording at some other point in time, the number one question we get is, like, why? Like, how can we possibly buy a house, or should we buy a house, or should we sell a house? I recently ran a poll on a next door neighbor account asking what the number one concern, if you were considering buying or selling a house, what would be your number one concern? And the number one answer was concern about market volatility. So I think market volatility and market information are hugely important, and everybody needs to be mindful of that, regardless of at what point in history you're thinking about buying or selling. But certainly today, it's very, very relevant. Equally so, I think that mirroring those market conditions with your own personal goals and seeing how those align or disalign and see how they affect one another is critically important. And so that's kind of a long-winded way of saying it. Right now it's a time for planning and information gathering. You have to see if there's an alignment between the current market and how that's going to affect the transaction itself, and to see if that comes in alignment with your goals. See which one of these two things is really driving the bus. And the best way to do that is really sit down with an expert, right? Sit down with a realtor, somebody from our team would be more than happy to sit down with you virtually, obviously, and go through this process, or just somebody find them, sit down with them, start asking some good questions, and make sure they're asking you good questions and getting you to think. So in part of that process, I want to talk a little bit about the state of the market. Okay, so this is somewhat of a macro view, and this is a very macro view, actually. What this is a chart that maps out the housing index and compared to the stock price index since 1989. Okay, and the reason I think it's important to look at this right now is because it gives, by looking backwards, it gives us an idea of what things may look like going forward. And so what this assumes is that the same starting point. Okay, so both indexes start at a number that's equal to 100. The actual number is not relevant. It could be $100, it could be $100,000, it could be $100 million. But the point is that initial equivalent starting number, how they rise and fall over time, and then you can see how that happens, obviously, relative to one another. So red line's the stock market, blue line's the housing market. So back in the mid 90s, you started to have a significant rise in the stock market. And previous to that, you had a slight decline. And it was kind of basically just a leveling of the housing market. And basically, this was the long-term recovery effects from the S&L scandals of the late 80s that affected the housing market. And then you also had significantly, you had still some volatile high interest rate markets that were going on. So that's why kind of you see a little bit of a downward trajectory here and a flattening, and then eventually a little bit of a growth. Stock market exploded in the late 90s, and this was the dot-com bubble, right? And then so there about 2000 or so, that bubble burst. As that bubble was increasing, you started to get some value increasing in the housing price index. But of course, the bubble burst and the market crashed, and then started to try to rebound in 2000. And the indicators were that it was going to rebound, but then 9/11 happened, and the market then crashed and bottomed out pretty hard. What happened to the housing market during 9/11, though, was there was this tiny little flattening for a few months, like 3 or 4 months, and then things kind of went back to normal. And so I think you put a kind of a little button in that thought right there for a minute, because we're going to come back to that a little bit later. So as the dot-com bubble crashed and the housing market continued to grow, what you ended up seeing was, as the recovery started here, late 2002, early 2003, you started to see an increase, a significant increase in home values over this time leading up to the housing crash of 2007, 2008. What was really driving most of this very steep growth was all of the, unfortunately, I have to say, the predatory lending, the extraordinarily aggressive financing products and vehicles that were out there, the 80/20 loans, the no money down loans, and then it got into the no documentation loans, and then financing that was coming alive for 110, 120, 130% of real market value sorts of things. And you just had this explosive growth in the housing market. But obviously, we all know how that story went. The market crashed, the bond market collapsed, everything fell apart. And then we had 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And stock market followed suit, right? The housing market crash caused a stock market crash. And then we sat in a trough in the housing market until about 2012, 2013. So prior to that, the stock market took off. It exploded and reached the point that it was at about 2 months ago, right before the pandemic hit. And then, of course, it fell off its cliff. The housing market, though, grew right from its recovery point. And this is where things I think need to be thought about a lot, right? We've all thought and felt that the housing market was on absolute fire since 2013, right? Highest and best, multiple offers, prices going above list price. And, wow, this is clearly a bubble, right? It's going to burst at some point. Well, no. Right. And there's some more data we're going to look at on the micro level in a second. But if you just think about just this big picture sort of thing, if you look up the rise of home prices over this period of time, there was at no point was there a rise, like a steepness to that curve that like you saw in the early to mid 2000s. Right. It was just this recovery growth that was steady Betty, and it just moved right along. If you compare that right to the stock market, like it was ripe for explosive failure. Right. I mean, just so much growth over the past 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So it only makes sense that it was extremely vulnerable. And I'm not saying it crashed for no reason and it was all speculative. Obviously, we're dealing with a major, major thing right now. But my point really is I just don't know that the housing market is going to suffer significantly from this pandemic. So let's talk about some micro views as to why I think that's also true. This is data coming right out of our multiple listing service. And what this, so this is, very, very close to real-time data. We've got data all the way through the month of March. We can look at things for the entire MLS, which covers the major metro county areas in Atlanta. And we can even dive, if I wanted to, I could dive very deep on all of these little metrics here. And I could also do this very specific for your neighborhood, either the one that you live in, a neighborhood that you're thinking about moving to or buying in for whatever reason. And so we could get some long-term trending data for very specific neighborhoods, which can be, back to our planning conversation, can be very helpful in the planning process for you. So like I said, I can do this. Anybody on my team capable of doing this. So please let us know if you have, if you'd like for us to set up a meeting about something like this. But as it relates to the entire metro market, some of the indexes that we like to look at are obviously sales price. Over the past 3 years, you're going to see this shape, this repetitive up and down shape. This is what we refer to as our seasonality. So, as spring markets come and go, in the summer, pricing tends to come up and come down and things of this nature. But generally speaking, it's been that steady kind of up and down and growth curve that you see over a long period of time. New listings, this is a similar pattern that you see, and this is basically the new listings that come online every single month, right? So you don't have a lot of listings in December or January, but then they rise as you would expect in the spring, and then kind of level out and then fall off again, right? Same pattern that should happen over and over again. And this year was really no different, right? January, a little spike up, February fall off, but then March, boom, nice little pop of 11,700 new listings in the month of March. Homes for sale. So this is the total number of homes that are for sale in the market. Again, you get your peak in the spring, summer months, and then they fall off as they sell off, rise, and fall. And the same thing again, December, January, February fell off a little bit, but then March, the inventory is, looking like it was growing in a growth trajectory. Pending sales is the one data point that has our attention right now. Same type of shape, same type of pattern that we tend to see. The only difference is that this year in December, we were at the low point, like we usually are in terms of pending. So this is the houses that have gone under contract in this given month. January, 7,400 pendings. February, almost 8,000 pendings. March fell to 7,200 pendings. Well, if you look back in history, January, February of 2019, 7,200. March, 9,000. Go back the year before, February, 7,000, March, 9,000. So we would expect, right? So same thing, 17, January, February, March, 7,000, March jumps up to 8,700. You would expect to see a lot more properties going under contract in March, more than you would have seen in February. But we didn't this year. We saw a fall off. And that shouldn't be a huge surprise, right? The pandemic released, we were all entering into quarantine. We had no idea what's going on. And if you were to look at this data back to 2008, which is all the data we have in this system, this is the first time there has ever been fewer pendings in the month of March than in the previous month of February. In fact, we typically on average see about a 30 to 40% increase in the number of pendings between the months of January, February, and March. And again, this year it went down. So that's the first time, right, since 2008 that's ever happened. So it's a huge indicator of, yes, the pandemic is having a real effect on the housing market. Another statistic I can't show you here, but the number of showings are tracked in another system, and showings were down by about 50% for the month of March. And again, that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. And so while that does seem concerning, closed sales, and let's just go back to the three-year look so it's a little easier to see. Properties were still closing. So the things that were under contract, buyers and sellers were fulfilling their contracts. We didn't see a fall off on that. So there were some isolated events where I heard of buyers deciding not to close out of fear. Those isolated events did not move the trajectory in a way that took it out of pattern from any other previous years that I saw. If you look at months of supply, this is where I have a lot of confidence in the housing market, specifically over a long period of time. This goes back to 2012. All right, month of supply, what is that? Month of supply defines the amount of real estate inventory that's on the market. If 0 listings were to come on the market from today going forward, then this is the number of months that it would take to sell off all of the current inventory. So it's this little metric that we track called month of supply. And what it means is that if there's about 6 months, give or take, of supply, we're in a neutral market, meaning that the market does not favor buyers. It does not favor sellers. It's fairly neutral. Anything less than 6 months, 5 or 6 months of supply, you're looking at a seller's market, right? That's more seller friendly. The supply is low, right? Sellers hold the cards more so than the buyers hold the cards. And then the inverse is also true. You get into 8, 9, 10, 11 months of inventory, and it's a buyer's market, more buyer favorable. And as you would expect from 2012, the sell-off was happening, and our inventory levels went from about 6 falling into the 3s and kind of oscillating between 3s and 4s, flirting with 5 in 2014 and 15 as the market really came back alive and a lot of inventory started flying in. But you just see the steady decline of inventory year after year after year. And actually, February of this year was the second lowest inventory mark in the past 2 decades, really. I mean, well, I'm sorry, the second lowest. January of 18 was 2.4 months of supply. February of this year was 2.5 months of supply. So what does that mean? Well, what I think it means is that it would take an extremely long period of time, like 12 to probably 18 months of basically lots of listings being brought into the market with no buyers being willing to buy those listings to get the supply levels up to a point to where it would affect pricing, right? Because pricing, basic economics 101, is always driven by supply and demand. And this curve is the supply demand curve for the real estate housing market. Yes, our pendings declined, and the tell of the tape will truly come 3 months or 4 months from now. If that pending number continues to go down and down and down and down, right, then the supply will grow more increasingly. But here's the thing, like we aren't seeing that. Like our team is still putting properties under contract. Buyers are wanting to buy, sellers are wanting to sell. Our Keller Williams office, the same thing is true. I've been talking with agents and brokers all over the state and all around the country, and people are still moving forward. So my look forward is actually a good one. Yes, things are a little bit weird right now, but things as things start to reopen, I think there'll be an explosive amount of pent up buyer potential and demand that'll just take off. So I really just don't see, the point of the story is I don't see a decline in price value because of anything that's going on. So that's my take on all of that. Real quickly, I just wanted to give you guys a peek at this in terms of back to our planning process. This is a worksheet that we go through with our buyers in the beginning of it. I'm not going to go through it right now. As you can see, there's a lot going on here, and it might look overwhelming and complicated. But the reality is this roadmaps the entire process. And this is a very effective thing to kind of walk through because it helps prepare you for what is going to happen during the process. And it also helps you understand what those next steps are going to look like. And then you can kind of come back, later on when you're going through the process, and you can revisit these things that we talked about. So, you'll be prepared for what earnest money is going to look like and what closing costs are going to look like and how long time frames are going to be and all these sorts of things. And a lot of those questions are going to be pre-answered. Anyways, it's just a really, really good reference point. It gets you thinking about the whole process. So again, we're super happy to help go through this with you, to help you prepare and be better planned for, and look, you're thinking about buying maybe 2, 3, 4 months from now. This is a great thing to do right now. Even if it's a half a year out, go ahead and do this now. It'll get the wheels turning, get you thinking, and get you better prepared for when the time is right. And then this is another process sheet that we use a little more so for our sellers, right? And so that they can understand what the marketing process looks like, what the showing process is going to look like, some typical timeframes that we see with all that, and then how things flow through as we move along. So again, these are great planning tools. And I think that right now it's a time for planning. Right now is not a great fit for everybody. If you have to sell, definitely it's an okay time to sell. If you have to buy, it's definitely an okay time to buy. Even if you just want to, right? It's still okay. I think we're able to do this in a safe kind of way. And everything that I see in the market from the data perspective is indicating that there really isn't anything to be fearful of in terms of, if I buy today, well, the property values are going to decline by 10%. I'm going to, be upside down 6 months into my home ownership. I just don't think that's going to happen. I really don't. Conversely, sellers may be fearful for various reasons. Maybe it's people coming to their property, and if you have a significant health concern, maybe right now isn't the right time. But if it's just that you're concerned and you're fearful that things aren't going to be handled well, we're here to make sure that things are handled well and that your property is accessed in a way that makes you comfortable and safe. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just kind of leave it here for a minute. See if there's any questions that come through. Well, I think that's it for today. So I really appreciate everybody who's checked it out and stayed online with us, and just reach out to us if you have any questions at all. Thanks so much.